Welcome to St Mary's Parish Church in Haddington. Our church has been standing beside the little River Tyne for around 600 years. During that time it became one of the three great collegiate churches of the Lothians. It has been battered by cannon fire and left roofless, half repaired, half left in ruins. Then, 50 years ago, it once more stood complete and whole again, the longest parish church in Scotland. This is the story of our church. The construction of St Mary's Church began about 1383 and took around 100 years to complete. Tragically, less than 70 years after its completion, it was a roofless ruin, a victim of the long Haddington siege. Just over 10 years later, Haddingtonians could only afford to repair the west end, and this is what the ruins looked like until the early 1970s. Then they were at last restored, and the first service to be held in the whole church since 1548 was held in 1973. This is the floor plan of St Mary's, showing how it is built in the shape of a cross. It has an east end, the choir, and a north and south transepts with the tower rising between them. These parts were all left in ruins. The west end, the nave, was repaired and closed off with a huge barrier wall. Now you see how the ruins looked from the outside before the 1970s. The other photo shows the church today, looking from the nave all the way to the choir, all covered over once again, but this time with a fiberglass ceiling. Do you see the nearest big high arch? That was completely blocked by the barrier wall which cut the church in two and shut out the ruins and the weather. Here is an illustration of the once ornate east end as it looked before the siege. At that time, of course, all Scottish churches were under the authority of the Pope and the Church of Rome, and most Scots and the Scottish nobility wanted it to stay that way. So how was it that the church came to be ruined? King Henry VIII of England had broken away from Rome by then and had installed himself as the supreme head of the new Church of England. Now he wanted his young son, Edward, betrothed to little Mary, Queen of Scots. The Scots refused. They wished to remain with Rome, and Henry was furious. He sent his army north, destroying towns and villages. It was a period called the Rough Wooing. Henry died in 1547. Edward then became king, and he sent his army back to Scotland and occupied the town of Haddington. The Scots and their French allies lay siege to the town for 18 months. Now St Mary's lay just outside the walls, and being the highest building was an excellent observation point, but also an obvious target. There is still plenty of evidence today of many musket ball holes in the walls. Clearly, those in the town suspected there was a man hiding behind that window in the tower. Others were behind buttresses. There are still holes behind those too. And you can also see cannonball damage. In the end, plague hit the town, the English soldiers departed, and the siege ended. Mary married the Dauphin of France. What did the nave, the west end, look like before it was ruined? Well, it was also very ornate, with many statues and stained glass windows. In fact, at that time, it was also separated from the east end, but by a carved screen. You can see this in the left picture. And behind that, the priests sang and chanted the services, completely unseen. The townspeople stood in the nave and listened. Alongside either side sat about 17 side chapels with altars dedicated to different saints, and each sponsored by gifts and money from the wealthy and the town guilds. You can see some of the altars beside the pillars in the other picture. Just inside the big west door, on the nearest pillar at about head height, there is still the medieval carving of a scalloped shell, the badge of the pilgrim. Some of these would stop at St Mary's as they journeyed all the way from St Andrew's Priory to Santiago Compostela in northern Spain. They had probably come via the Shrine of Our Lady in nearby Whitekirk, the site of a shrine as famous as that to Our Lady of Walsingham in England. After the shrine at Whitekirk was destroyed by Edward III's army, a legend tells us that one of the English soldiers, present at the time and feeling full of remorse, picked up the broken statue of St. Mary the Virgin and brought it to Haddington. It was later restored and placed in a newly built St. Mary's Church. It was placed on the altar of a side chapel, thought to be near the scallop shell, and that chapel was reconsecrated as the shrine. Then, of course, it was once again destroyed in the siege. A few years after the siege, the West End was finally repaired and furnished simply to the design of the new Reformed church led by John Knox. He was a Haddingtonian and was born just over the other side of the river from the church. St. Mary's was now very plain, with a pulpit for the preacher, seats all the way round for the congregation, and clear glass in the windows. As numbers increased, more seating was needed, and now the magistrates and trades associations built themselves small lofts, though in a rather haphazard way. You can see them on the left. Up to 1,000 people used to attend at one time, and they needed more space. This was to be a big job, raising side roofs and making pillars taller, so that the taller galleries could fit in all the way round. Still, there were too few seats, so the floor was lowered and a big gallery was built at each end. The organ was in the east gallery, which backed onto the barrier wall. When they dug up the floor, they unearthed some skeletons, probably those of people buried in the original graveyard of the little church that existed before the present one. Slowly, the clear glass in all the windows was replaced with fine pictures in stained glass as the new Victorian Gothic era arrived, starting in the 1850s and finishing in the early 20th century. And here on the left is the West End today. The floor panels show the site of the now vanished barrier wall. More comfortable chairs have, thankfully, replaced the old pews. In fact, under each old pew there used to be electric heating elements, and when switched on, bottoms roasted, but heads and feet still froze. Very recently, the old and rusting lights in the high ceiling had to be replaced. To change a bulb meant a very dangerous ladder climb, which is not allowed in current health and safety rules. LED lighting has now been installed throughout the church at a huge cost. The East End was tackled first. To screen off the West End and keep it dust-free, a huge, amazing replica photoprint of the East End was hung from the same arch once filled by the old wall, a 21st century barrier wall, in fact. Above the ceiling, there are still some of the original great oak beams, acorns in the 12th century. And so we move from the West End into the south transept, into the restored area with its weathered, repaired walls, and these two windows, which are the only ones to be in stained glass. A previously stored three-panelled window from demolished St. Michael's Church in Torquay almost fitted between the stone mullions of the south window. With the addition of some blue glass, it fitted, and now looks quite remarkable. The crucifixion by arts and crafts artist Burne-Jones shows some fading of facial details. It could be because they were trying out new colour pigments which did not fire into the glass properly, or perhaps the wrong kiln temperatures were selected. On the west wall, giving amazing reflections, is Saxe Shaw's window in memory of Margaret Cicluna. It includes beautiful multi-hued Hartley wood glass from Sunderland, no longer made and much prized. As our tour returns to the East End, we look at some of the feats of the restoration. The 50th anniversary of this momentous event will be held in 2023. The use of recycled materials was high on the list of priorities for the restorers, sensibly trying to save as much cash as possible. The Torquay window is a good example of this philosophy in action. After the restoration, the tower was again strong enough to support bells. The original three medieval ones were taken off to Durham after the siege and lost. However, Dunecht House in Aberdeenshire had 8 big disused bells in its tall tower, originally to celebrate George V's coronation. They were rung from an electric keyboard, but the wires had been removed and the bell's clappers had become very stiff. Those bells must have woken the residents very efficiently at one time. However, once restored, they were successfully hung in St. Mary's Tower in time to ring in the millennium, and they still ring out their welcome each Sunday. Slates came from Glasgow's Gorbals, and matching stone from the closed Caledonian Station at the west end of Princes Street. Funding was always a problem, and people were encouraged to donate money for anything, ranging from so many slates or stones, mullions for a single window, or for hand-blown glass. A Suffolk shipbuilder designed lightweight fiberglass panels for the ceilings, and they were painted to look like stone. Carved ceiling bosses were moulded in resin, in imitation of the stone originals. Some of the original pillars were built with tree trunks in their cores. Those in the East End were found to be rotting, which led to significant subsidence. The cores were replaced by concrete. A Lothian pipe organ builder made the new Baroque-styled instrument, and its lovely tone is appreciated in many services and public concerts. The River Tyne, which flows very close by, has tended to flood from time to time. In 1948, for example, a really bad flood led to water swirling in among the ruins themselves. The locals rowed boats into the choir and even inside the nave. All the windows in the East End are filled with clear, hand-blown glass. Several years ago, a branch from the copper beech tree outside the huge east window crashed through the upper part and chipped the marble communion table below. The tree was later taken down. The Haddington crest of the goat eating the vine was a sign of the very fertile lands all around. The sculpture, found under the ground nearby, was repaired and placed above the communion table. At either side of the east end are the Lady and Columba aisles. At the end of each are fine tapestries made in the Dovecut studios, including 12 seat covers. The colours mimic those found in East Lothian with its coastline and its farmlands. The Reverend John Brown was a very famous preacher in the 18th century. A former shepherd boy who was orphaned around 11 years of age, he taught himself many languages, was a polymath, and later became a minister, a moderator, and a professor in divinity, and attracted many to his sermons in his small Haddington church. One of his many self-interpreting Bibles is displayed nearby. A stained glass window in the West End was donated by his family in his memory. It is also by Burne-Jones. John Brown and several family members are buried a little way from St. Mary's west door. Here you see a photo of the Lauderdale aisle. You go through an archway in the north aisle. This space used to be the former sacristy, the room where the priests robed before services. In the early 17th century, it was repaired to become the burial vault for the Maitland family, with effigies of John Maitland, Chancellor to James VI, and his son, the first Earl of Lauderdale. Recently, at the time of the restoration, the 17th Earl of Lauderdale repaired the crypt and then had the chapel above reconsecrated as an ecumenical place of worship in memory of the once famous shrine at Whitekirk and the lost shrine in St. Mary's. It is now the Chapel of the Virgin Mary, Christ Child, and the Three Kings. An annual pilgrimage was established from Whitekirk to Haddington, and a service was held in the chapel on arrival. However, numbers dwindled and the event ceased. More recently, and pre-COVID, many walkers formed a new annual May pilgrimage going from Haddington to Whitekirk, with halts for short services at the old ruined St. Martin's Church in Haddington, and then on to Athelstonford and East Linton. This will hopefully be repeated in 2022. Now back to the West End, with a view down the length of the restored church. St. Mary's has become the new lamp of Lothian, named after the lost Franciscan priory, which used to stand 100 metres downstream and was famed for its elegance and its clearness of spiritual light, which, it is said, attracted many. It was the solace of a whole community. St. Mary's over the centuries has only been forced to close its doors twice, the first time for the siege, the second time for COVID. And so once more, we are open for services, open to welcome visitors, to have concerts, and perhaps for the famous Martinmas Fair in November. We would be delighted if you do manage to come along and visit us. Our doors open days are Saturday the 25th of September from 11 to 4 o'clock and Sunday the 26th of September from 1:30 to 4 o'clock. Thereafter we will be staying open until the 1st of October, Monday to Friday, 1:30 to 4 o'clock. It costs about £3,000 per week for the upkeep of St Mary's, which is maintained by the congregation. If you would like to make a donation for the upkeep of our beautiful building, then please see our website at www.stmaryskirk.co.uk. Thank you.